What if? The NHL is filled with moments that could have altered everything we know and love about the sport. What if Wayne Gretzky was never traded to LA? What if Mario Lemieux stayed healthy? What if Connormcdavid had won Game 7 and completed that insane comeback? These are moments in time that have helped define legacies and change the course of history for many franchises. But there is one moment that stands out as the biggest what if in NHL history. One team that was defined to break the history books and staple themselves as the greatest team of all time. One moment that, to this day, is still impacting the league as we know it. The 2022-2023 Boston Bruins. Memorable moments can be easy to come by in hockey, but the legendary ones, those that stand the test of time, those are the runs that we as fans crave more than anything. These are the moments where legends are born and banners are hung high in the rafters, and no place has more passion or championship culture than Boston. The year was 2022. The Boston Bruins, one of the NHL's storied franchises, crafted a regular season narrative for the ages, shattering records, claiming the President's Trophy, and laying the groundwork for what could have been the greatest hockey team of all time. Yet, in a stunning paradox, the team lost its composure, ending their otherwise historic run in the most unexpected way. But how exactly did something like this happen? October 2022. The Boston Bruins are set to embark on a new season campaign, this time featuring not only new faces, but some familiar ones that return to the lineup. After losing to the Carolina Hurricanes during their previous playoff run, the Bruins decided to make some much needed changes. The first, firing Bruce Cassidy, their hard-nosed, old-school coach, and replacing him with a new-aged, player-friendly coach in Jim Montgomery. The second addressed the needs of the roster, particularly the center position. They did this by bringing back familiar faces like Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. Third, health. Find a way to stay afloat while Brad Marchand and Charlie McAvoy recover from their injuries. The expectations were at a minimum for the Bruins. Like I mentioned, they had some veterans coming back to the lineup, but they were not spring chickens anymore. And they also were dealing with some injuries that most people thought would really impact their lineup. But through October, the Boston Bruins completely shocked everyone. In their first 4 games, the Bruins would score 21 goals, earning a record of 3-1. They would then finish out October by only allowing 6 goals in 5 games, and achieving a record of 8-1 throughout the first month. This was a phenomenal start for the Boston Bruins. Their veterans were producing at a high level, their depth was starting to contribute, and their star players like David Pastrnak were stepping up and showing out. But what really made the Bruins special to start the year was their outstanding goaltending tandem. Linus Ullmark, a free agent pickup the year prior, had fully taken on the responsibility as Boston's #1 netminder following the retirement of longtime goalie Tuukka Rask, and his backup at the time, Jeremy Swayman, was nothing short of exceptional. Carrying their stellar play into November, Boston's netminders backstopped the Bruins to an astonishing 19-3-0 record, only losing 2 games by a close margin during a very busy month. Boston was not only running the Atlantic Division, they were the hottest team in all of hockey, and it was at this point when they started to get back some of their players from injury, making this already perfect lineup look practically unbeatable. This is where the question of sustainability came up quite frequently in Boston. The Bruins' run, while spectacular, just seemed unrealistic, and most if not all of the hockey world expected a regression to happen at some point. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. Through December, the Bruins only lost 1 game in regulation, and had a league-best record of 28-4-4, as they prepared for their Winter Classic matchup against the Pittsburgh Penguins. After putting on a defensive show in their outdoor game, Boston would have their worst month of the season, going 10-3-1. Again, this was their worst month. At this point, let me save you some time. The Bruins were now on a path to win the most regular season hockey games in league history, a record held by the Red Wings and the Lightning with 62. From February to the end of the season, the Bruins went 26-5-0, finishing with an NHL best record of 65-12-5. This allowed them to surpass the Red Wings and the Lightning and become the best regular season hockey team that the league has ever witnessed. An unexpected, historic run for the Boston Bruins made them the odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup, But we can't glance over a couple of things that happened throughout the final couple of months. For starters, they had a very aggressive trade deadline, acquiring Tyler Bertuzzi, Garnett Hathaway, and Dmitry Orlov to truly round out their roster into a powerhouse. But something else that happened in Game 82 of the season was an injury to their captain Patrice Bergeron, something that is quite under-discussed when we talk about the Bruins' run that year. But at this point, I have to pause you again because there's something else that's kind of under-discussed when we talk about the stories behind the 2023 playoffs. During that time, the Eastern Conference was an arms race towards the end of the season, featuring 4 teams: the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Florida Panthers, the New York Islanders, and believe it or not, the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo went on a 7-2-1 run, but unfortunately in the final couple of games, they fell short, finishing the season with 91 points. Meanwhile, the New York Islanders had locked down one of the top wildcard spots, leaving 2 teams to finish out: the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Florida Panthers. The Panthers finished the season with 91 points, but since they had the tiebreakers over the Penguins and the Sabres, they would be granted the playoff spot if all teams finished tied in the standings. But hold on, the Penguins had one final game to play, and it was against a bottom 3 team, the Chicago Blackhawks. The Penguins were the team that should have made the playoffs that year. They had a prime opportunity to get Sidney Crosby into the postseason, and were competing against one of the bottom teams in the NHL. But unfortunately, hockey doesn't really work that way, and sometimes the most unpredictable outcome is the one that ends up being in reality. The Penguins would ultimately lose to the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Florida Panthers would get their shot at the playoffs, going up against the powerhouse Boston Bruins in a matchup that looked like it was over before it started. Game 1, Panthers at Bruins. Linus Ullmark would start for Boston, while Alex Lyon would get to stand between the pipes for the Florida Panthers. Boston controlled the game offensively in this one, with Brad Marchand opening up the scoring for his 50th playoff goal. Pastrnak and DeBrusk added goals, and Linus Ullmark made 31 saves for Boston. Meanwhile, the Florida Panthers got 1 goal from Matthew Tkachuk and 26 stops from Alex Lyon. The first victory would go to the Boston Bruins as we headed into Game 2, remaining at TD Garden. Game 2 was an entirely different story. Boston, who was known for tandeming their goalies, decided to stick with Linus Ullmark, who reportedly was playing through a hip injury to start the series. But because he played so well in Game 1, the Bruins didn't think that this was going to be a factor. The game would stay locked up through the first 2 periods, but Florida exploded in Period 3 to beat Boston 6-3 on the road and tie the series 1-1. Game 3, and Taylor Hall would be the hero for the Bruins, having a goal and an assist on the night. Linus Ullmark would put up a bounce-back performance, and Boston would reclaim home ice against the Panthers. Game 4, also a similar story. Taylor Hall put on a show, 2 goals and 2 assists, to help the Bruins take a commanding 3-1 series lead heading back to Boston, with a chance to close this one out in a gentleman's sweep. The series was going exactly as everyone predicted. Boston was the more dominant team, but something people didn't account for was the resiliency of the Florida Panthers. Game 5. Panthers looked to starve off elimination on the road and get this series back to Florida. Sergei Bobrovsky was outstanding, making 44 saves, including a miraculous stop on Brad Marchand with just a second to spare in regulation, a moment that many Boston fans look back on as the biggest what-if moment of the series. A Bruins turnover in overtime by Linus Ullmark behind the net led to Matthew Tkachuk's backhander at 6:05, sealing the win for Florida and keeping their improbable comeback alive. This was the game that changed everything for Boston. Game 6. The biggest storyline: who is starting in net for Boston? The Bruins continued to stay firm with Linus Ullmark as their starter, going against their philosophy from the season, which was tandeming their netminders. Florida surged to a 3-2 lead thanks to goals from Montour, Tkachuk, and Barkov, before Boston countered and even took a 4-3 edge courtesy of David Pastrnak's power play goal. But then chaos erupted in a frenetic third period. Zach Delph tied it, Jake DeBrusk struck short-handed, and Tkachuk scored his second to knot the game at 5-5, barely 27 seconds apart. Moments later, Eetu Luostarinen would rip home the game winner. Sergei Bobrovsky's 30 saves and Sam Reinhart's empty netter would close this one out, forcing a highly improbable Game 7 against the President's Trophy winner. Game 7. Both teams playing with guys between the pipes that were not in net to start the series. Boston with Swayman, Florida with Bobrovsky. At the Garden, you could cut through the air with a knife. The fans were nervous after coming off a very heartbreaking loss back in 2019 to the St. Louis Blues, and this was the first time they felt like they had a competitive team that could go back to that position. The Panthers and Bruins would go back and forth, goal for goal, but eventually the Bruins had gotten a 3-2 lead early in the third. But Florida, they kept fighting. With under a minute to go in regulation, Brandon Montour would score his second of the night, a clutch hammer from the left circle to tie the game 3-3. We had a Game 7 going to overtime. Both teams would exchange chances, but then, just 8:35 into overtime, the Florida Panthers would maintain possession, and Carter Verhaeghe would unleash a wrist shot that would beat Jeremy Swayman and seal a memorable series comeback for the Panthers, while delivering what was a crushing blow to an historic Boston Bruins team. Boston was stunned, their fan base in shock after witnessing their historic hockey team collapse in the first round of the playoffs. Never have I seen a moment where players seem so baffled by the outcome of a series, but then again, reality can be challenging to face. The Bruins stepped off the ice that night in the most emotional way possible, and there were many questions surrounding their roster for years to come. The organization was up against the cap. Their core players, while not officially announced at the time, were speculating the thought of retirement, and the Bruins, after this historic run, were no more. In hindsight, this series changed everything about the league. For Florida, they may have lost the cup that year, but they came back and have now cemented themselves as a potential dynasty and powerhouse team, winning back-to-back championships. For Boston, the fall-off wasn't immediate, but eventually inner turmoil and roster complications destroyed the team from the inside out. That team that had shattered records, captivated fans, and woke the city had officially evaporated, and along with it, a long-time culture, legendary players, and memories that could have been created. But this is one of the biggest what-if moments in NHL history. Let me know your thoughts on this story. Do you remember the 2022-23 Boston Bruins? And do you think that this series changed the entire league as we know it? Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next episode.